For week 5, our session is all about experiments, outcomes, sample space, and events. The objectives of the session: number 1, illustrates an experiment, outcome, sample space, and event. Second, counts the number of occurrences of an outcome in an experiment through a table, tree diagram, systematic listing, and fundamental counting principle. Okay, magandang araw sa inyong lahat. Ang magiging session natin para sa quarter 4 week 5 ay about experiments, outcomes, sample space, and events. So para mas maging malinaw at magaang ang ating discussion para sa session na ito, uumpisahan natin ang ating discussion sa definition of terms. Ano yung mga bagay, mga terminologies na kailangan natin tandaan if we are going to deal with quarter 4 week 5, specifically in probability and statistics. So we'll start with random experiment. In some books, they just call it experiment. Random experiment is a mechanism that produces a definite outcome that cannot be predicted with certainty. It is any activity with an observable result. In some books, the other definition that we can associate with random experiment is any activity that can be done repeatedly. Okay? Tatlong bagay na kailangan natin tandaan dito. Una, definite yung outcome na kalalabasan. Alam natin na ito ang mga posibleng mangyari. Okay? However, the second thing na kailangan natin tandaan, kahit alam natin yung mga posibleng mangyari, hindi tayo, walang level, walang certainty, hindi ganun kasigurado na sa mga possible outcomes na yun, ito ang pwedeng mangyari. Hindi siya specific, ika nga. And third thing is these are activities that can be done repeatedly. Pwede nating ulit-ulitin until such time we got our desired outcome. So ano ba yung mga activities na halimbawa ng experiment? So we have here tossing a coin. So alam natin na ang coin ay may dalawang bahagi lang, na later on i-discuss naman natin. But to give you an advanced background regarding the parts of a coin, we have the heads and the tail. Okay, so alam natin na una, bakit siya naging example ng experiment? Una, alam natin na pag tinos natin ang coin, alam natin na heads or tail lang. Yun ang mga possible outcomes niya. However, wala tayong certain level of assurance na okay, heads ang lalabas dyan. Okay, tail ang lalabas dyan. Walang ganun. Alam lang natin na heads or tail ang lalabas dyan. Period. Okay? And this is an activity that can be done repeatedly. So, pwede nating ulit-ulitin ang pagtotoss ng coin until such time we got our desired outcome. Or we obtain our desired outcome. Another example of random experiment is rolling a die. So, we all know that a single die or a die has 6 faces. O, kasi cube yun eh. Meron siyang 6 faces. And each face ay represent ng 1 dot, 2 dots, 3 dots, 4 dots, 5 dots, 6 dots. So, from 1 dot to 6 dots. So, alam natin na yun lang yung mga outcomes, yung mga possible outcomes. 1 dot to 6 dots. Pero, hindi tayo sure na pagka ni-roll natin ang die, 6 ang lalabas dyan. 1 ang lalabas dyan. Yun yung ibig sabihin nun. And another thing, it is also an activity that can be done repeatedly. So, pwede mo i-roll ang die until such time makuha mo yung desired outcome mo. Okay? Next, picking a ball from a box of 10 balls. Okay? Now, let us assume na yung ball na yan ay numbered from 1 to 10. Okay? Numbered from 1 to 10. May label siya. Ganun. So, nasa isang box yan. Nandun yung 10 bola. So, pwede tayong pumili. Alam natin na ang magiging outcomes lang niya is from first ball to 10th ball. Okay? Pero, hindi tayo ganun kasigurado that once na pumili ka ng bola, kumuha ka ng bola from that box, okay, makukuha ko dito 7th ball. Hindi tayo ganun ka-sure. Kasi pwedeng makuha mo 3rd ball. So, ganun po yung, kaya siya example din na experiment. It's also an activity that can be done repeatedly because pwede mong ibalik yung nakuha mo kung hindi naman yun ang desired outcome mo until such time you got or you obtained your desired outcome. So again, picking a ball from a box of 10 balls is an example of an experiment. We also have drawing a card from a deck of 52 cards. Alam natin na yung standard deck of 52 cards, nahahati yan sa apat. We have the hearts, the diamonds, the spades, and the clubs. And bawat isang bahagi nun, meron yung 13 na laman. We have the ace, we have the numbered cards, we have the face cards, yung the king, the queen, and the jack. Okay? So for example, nag-draw ka ng card from deck of 52 cards. Nakuha mo ay king of spades. King of spades. Eh, ang gusto mo, queen of hearts. So pwede mo ibalik yung card. Pwede mo ulit-ulitin until such time you got your desired outcome. So these are the examples of experiments. So let us repeat. When we talk about experiments, these are activities that produces a definite outcome, but we cannot predict with certainty kung ano yung talagang magiging outcome niya. And again, these are also activities that can be done repeatedly. Okay, so yun po yung una nating terminology. So ituloy natin yung discussion natin kanina regarding the definition of terms, regarding sample space, events, outcomes, and experiments, specifically in the concept of probability and statistics. So let's have the outcome, or in some books they call it as the sample point. So outcome or sample point is a result of a random experiment. Okay? So outcomes, or sample points. So once you perform a given random experiment, ang tawag po natin sa mga kalalabasan niya is outcomes or sample point. Okay? Yun po ang tawag doon, outcomes. Resulta after you perform a random experiment. So pag toss ka ng coin, yung mga resulta noon, yung mga possible na resulta noon, we call them as outcome or sample point. Pag ni-roll natin ang die, ano-ano yung mga possible na maging scenario, once we roll a die, we call them as outcomes, yung mga possible scenario. Next, we also have the sample space. So sample space is the set of all possible outcomes or sample point. Thus, in the context of random experiment, the sample space is our universal set. Okay? So, sample space, para hindi tayo malito, si sample space, siya ay set ng mga possible outcomes. The mere fact that we mention about the set, gagamit po tayo dito ng braces sa ginagamit natin sa lesson ng sets sa grade 7. So, just remember that the sample space is the universal set. Kung sinabi natin universal set sa grade 7, yan po yung totality ng lahat ng elements ng set. Okay, universal set. Gumagamit po tayo dito ng braces. So, once we express sample space or we declare sample space, we are going to use this symbol. Okay? And we also have the event. Event is a subset of the sample space. So, pag kumuha ka ng certain event from the sample space or a certain part dun sa sample space, we call them as the event. Bahagi ng sample space. Yun ang ibig sabihin ng event. So, out of the universal set, yung pumuha ka ng part dun, event po yun. Okay? So, yan po yung mga terms or terminologies that we are going to encounter once we deal with this topic about sample space, events, experiments, probability, and statistics. Okay, so let's start with our first example. So example number 1, the given random experiment is we need to construct a sample space. Ito po yung given experiment natin. Construct a sample space for the experiment that consists of rolling a single die. And find the events that correspond to the phrase an odd number is rolled. So in doing the sample space, in expressing the sample space, or in identifying the sample space for this experiment, kailangan matukoy muna natin ano-ano po yung mga possible outcomes pagka pinerform itong experiment na ito. But before that, ito po yung itsura ng die. Ayan. Okay, meron yang 6 faces. So, ang mga possible outcomes, once we roll natin ang die, is we have the 1 dot, 2 dots, 3 dots, 4 dots, 5 dots, 6 dots. So, ito lang po yung mga possible na kalalabasan once we roll a single die. And meron tayong specific na tinukoy doon sa random experiment natin that we need to find the event that corresponds to the phrase an odd number is rolled. So, meron yung 6 na numero, 1 dot, 2 dots, 3 dots, 4 dots, 5 dots, 6 dots. So, yung mga odd number dyan, we have the 1 dot, 3 dots, 5 dots. So, yan po yung mga odd number dyan. Ano yan eh, nahahati kasi sa dalawa yan eh. Meron tayong tatlong even number, yung 2 dots, 4 dots, 6 dots, at meron tayong tatlong odd numbered dots doon sa die. We have the 1 dot, 3 dots, and then 5 dots. So, sa event na an odd number is rolled, ito lang po yung mga possible outcomes. Okay? So, once we do the sample space, alam natin pag sinabi natin sample space, it is a universal set of all the possible outcomes. So, we are going to use the braces. So, ang sample space natin dito, we let it as S kasi gumagamit tayo ng capital letter in expressing sets sa grade 7. So, we let S as the sample space is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Ibig sabihin yan, ito pong sample space na yan, yung nasa loob ng braces na to, yan yung mga possible outcomes. Once we perform this experiment, specifically when we roll a single die. Okay? So, ang pinakaiba lang nito, yung outcome, nilagay mo lang sa sample space. Okay? Gumamit ka lang ng braces. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So, yung event natin dito, sabi dito, find the event that correspond to the phrase an odd number is rolled. So, yung mga odd number dito is yung 1, yung 3, at yung 5. Okay? Sinabi nating odd number, these are numbers that cannot be divided into pairs. So, yung mga event natin that correspond to the odd number is rolled is we set E. We let E as the event that correspond to this particular event, which is an odd number is rolled. So, E is equal to 1, 3, 5. Naka-enclose sa braces. So, ganyan po ang ginagawa natin in constructing a sample space. First, we need to identify ano yung mga possible outcomes. And then, out from the outcomes, nilalagay natin siya sa sample space. And we all know that sample space is the totality of all the possible outcomes, set of all possible outcomes of a given experiment. So, we are going to use the symbol na braces. And then, out of the sample space, we get the event. We all know that the event is a subset of the sample space. O dahil odd number ang pinag-uusapan natin dito, odd number yung na-roll, so tinukoy natin na kapag ka-odd number ang pinag-uusapan, ito yung mga possible outcomes na pwedeng lumabas. Specifically, when we are talking about odd number in the single die. So that is our example number 1. Okay, so let's have example number 2. It states here that the given experiment is we need to construct a sample space for the experiment that consists of selecting one slip of paper from a box containing 10 slips numbered 1, 2, 3 until 10 respectively. And the given event for this experiment is a slip that is possible to be selected is a number less than 5. So a slip has a number less than 5. That is the given experiment or the given event, I should say. So the first thing that we need to do, kagaya ng ginawa natin kanina, is identify natin yung mga possible outcomes. So yung mga possible outcomes, pag nag-select tayo ng slip of paper, 10 slip ng paper numbered 1 to 10. So obviously, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yan yung mga possible outcomes. Ang given event natin is yung makukuha nating slip ay a number less than 5. So numbers na less than 5, alam natin 1, 2, 3, 4. So yan yung mga possible outcomes, okay? And the given event. Now, if we are going to express this outcome or the sample points as a sample space, ito po siya. So we let S as the letter that will represent our sample space for this experiment. So we have here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So nilagay lang natin itong lahat na ito sa isang set. O, kasi alam natin ang sample space ay universal set. Universal set, totality ng mga possible outcomes, okay, ng given experiment for this example. So, yung event natin, slip has a number less than 5. If we are going to express this one as a set because an event is a subset of a sample space, gagamit din tayo ng brace. So we have here E that is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4. Yung set E na yan, ito po yung 1, 2, 3, 4. Yung nasa loob ng braces, yan po yung mga numbers less than 5 for this event. Kasi nga, ano daw yung, we need to construct an event. We need to find the event that corresponds to a slip has a number less than 5. So ito po yun. Ito yung mga possible outcomes kapag yung event is a slip. Makakakuha tayo ng event o ng isang paper, a slip of paper na less than 5. So ito po yung mga possible outcomes niya. Pwedeng 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? So yan po yung outcomes, sample space, and the event, for example, number 2. Ngayon, para sa bahaging ito, alamin natin yung iba't ibang pamamaraan, papaano natin malalaman yung total number of possible outcomes in a given experiment, ilan lahat ang mga posibleng mangyari kapag nag-perform ng experiment. At second, ano-ano rin yung mga pamamaraan para matukoy natin ano-ano ang mga possible outcomes pag nag-perform ng experiment. Okay. So again, we can count the number of occurrences. Sinabi nating number of occurrences, ilan lahat yung possible outcomes. Okay, so we can count the number of occurrences of an outcome in an experiment by using the following methods. So meron tayong 4 na method. So we have through a table, we have through a tree diagram, we have through systematic listing, and the last one is through fundamental counting principle. Ngayon, sa 4 na ito, yung table, tree diagram, systematic listing, perfect siyang method. Kahit ano po dyan, itong tatlong ito ay perfect method for us to know kung ano-ano yung mga specific possible outcomes pagka pinerform natin ang experiment. Ipapakita sa iyo yan ng 4 na to. Na kapag pinerform mo ito may experiment, ito lahat ang mga posibleng mangyari. Masasabi rin itong mga 1, 2, 3 na ito kung ilan lahat ang possible outcomes. Kasi nga, nakita mo na kung ano-ano yung mga posibleng pwedeng mangyari. Dahil nakita mo na, pwede mo nang mabilang. So, perfect itong first 3 na ito for you to know, first one, what are the possible outcomes when we perform a given experiment. Second, it's also applicable, the first 3 are also applicable in determining the total number of possible outcomes in performing a given experiment or in a given event. Okay? Ngayon, ano po yung number 4, fundamental counting principle? Yung fundamental counting principle, actually, this particular method is just a perfect method in determining the total number of possible outcomes. Kung gusto mo lang malaman kung ilan lahat ang possible outcomes, pag nag-perform na experiment, number 4 is a very perfect method for that particular scenario. If and only if you just want to know the total number of possible outcomes, then you can use the fundamental counting principle. So later on, we will have a more detailed and comprehensive discussion for this particular method. So again, these 4 methods are the methods in determining first, kung ano-ano yung mga possible outcomes once we perform a given experiment. Okay? And second, para malaman ilan lahat ang total number of possible outcomes. Okay? So, ito po yung table, tree diagram, systematic listing, and fundamental counting principle. Okay, so let's have an example regarding in determining the sample space of a given experiment. So, for this particular part, magko-concentrate tayo dun sa tree diagram using the table method, the tabular method, and using the systematic listing. So, meron tayong isang example, aalamin natin yung sample space niya, pero ipapakita natin yung solution, yung pamamaraan ng pagkuha ng sample space gamit yung table, yung tree diagram, and the systematic listing. Hindi muna natin isasama si fundamental counting principle, magkakaroon tayo ng separate discussion or example for that. Okay? But for now, we are going to focus first with the tabular method, the tree diagram, and the systematic listing. So, this is our example. Example number 3. Construct a sample space for the experiment that consists of tossing 2 coins. Find the event that correspond to the phrase 2 heads are tossed. Okay, 2 heads ay tinos. So, alamin muna natin ano ba yung mga parts ng coin na yan. So, ito po yun. Ito po yung head, ito po yung tail. So, para sa example na ito, para matukoy natin yung sample space sa example na ito, gagamit po na tayo sa example na ito ng table. Unahin natin gamitin sa table. Paano ba siya gamitin? So, ito po yun. So, we have here the first coin. We have here the second coin. Sa first coin, alam natin ang mga possible outcomes niyan. Head, tsaka tail. Yun naman talaga. Sa second coin, ganun din. Head, tsaka tail. Okay? Ngayon, tinos natin yung 2 coin. Tinos natin. Lumapag sa lupa. Okay? So, for example, lumabas sa first coin, head. Actually nga, hindi rin tayo sure kung head ang lalabas sa first coin. For example, head. Sa second coin, hindi tayo sure, gaano tayo ka-sure na head din ang lalabas doon. Tandaan natin sa experiment, sinabi natin kanina, pag sinabi natin random experiment, these are any activities na merong definite outcome. Definite naman yung outcome. It can be head or tail, sa first coin. It can be head or tail. Definite ang outcome. Pero, hindi tayo sure na head sa first coin, head din sa second coin. Okay? So, malalaman lang natin dito, ano-ano ang mga possible outcomes when we toss 2 coins. Okay? So, ang unang possible na pwedeng mangyari na once tinos natin ang 2 coin, pwedeng ang mangyari, 2 heads ang lalabas. Head sa first coin, head sa second coin. Tignan lang yung pattern. Pwede rin ang mangyari, head sa first coin, tail sa second coin. Pwede yon. Pwede ang other scenario, tail sa first coin, head sa second coin. At ang isa pang scenario na pwede mangyari, tail sa first coin, tail sa second coin. So ito po lahat yung mga possible outcomes. So kung ating susumahin, the number of possible outcomes sa pag-toss ng 2 coin ay 4. Paano natin nasabi na 4? Binilang natin ito. 1, 2, 3, 4. Itong mga naka-red na yan ay tumutukoy sa mga possible outcomes kapag tinos natin ang 2 coin. And kapag nilagay natin ito, kinonvert natin ito sa sample space, so pag sinabi natin sample space, gagamit tayo ng set, ng braces. So ito po yun. Ang sample space para sa experiment na ito ay set S, that is HH, HT, TH, TT. Okay? So, head, 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 tail, tail, head, tail, tail. And, sabi pa dito, we need to find the event that correspond to the phrase 2 heads are tossed. So, kailangan daw natin tukuyin yung event na nagsasabi about 2 heads are tossed. So, kung tinignan natin yung mga specific possible outcomes, ito po yung part na nagsasabi na 2 heads are tossed. So, our event for this, for the event or the set that will represent about 2 heads are tossed, ito po yun. Set E, HH, head, head. Ito po yun. Ito po yung laman ng set na ito, yung element ng set na ito ay tumutukoy sa event na once we toss 2 coins, 2 heads ang lalabas. So, yun po yung paggamit ng tabular method sa pag-alam ng sample space in example number 3. So, again, this is the tabular method in determining the sample space for example number 3. Okay, so we still have the same example. We are still going to use the same example in this part, pero we will use another way of determining or in representing the sample space of a given experiment. So again, same example pa din. So construct a sample space for the experiment that consists of tossing 2 coins. Find the event that correspond to the phrase 2 heads are tossed. Okay? So in this example, so in this particular part of our example, we are now going to use the tree diagram. Okay? So tree diagram ay perfect to use kapag una, gusto mo talagang malaman yung mga specific possible outcomes when we perform a given experiment. And second, perfect din siya para malaman natin yung mga connections ng mga outcomes yung mga elements ng event sa isa't isa. Kasi gumagamit siya ng arrows. Makikita natin mamaya. Okay, paano ba ito ginagamit, itong tree diagram? So, sa first coin, alam natin na dalawa ang possible outcome. We have the head and then the tail. Okay? Ngayon, ito naman sa second coin. So, second coin, alam natin, head tsaka tail lang din ang lalabas. However, kung sa first coin ay head, nung tinos natin dalawang coin, head ang first coin, hindi tayo sure na head din ang lalabas dun sa second coin. Or the other way around, kung tail yung first coin, hindi rin tayo sure na tail ang lalabas sa second coin. So, kailangan natin ipakita lahat ng possible outcomes. Remember, in random experiment, ipapakita lang niya sa iyo, sasabihin lang niya sa iyo na definite ang outcome. Definite naman talagang outcome. Sa first coin, head or tail ang lalabas. Sa second coin, head or tail lang din ang lalabas. Pero, hindi niya sasabihin sa iyo na, okay, itinos natin yung dalawang coin, parehas na head ang lalabas. Walang ganon na level of certainty. So, paano natin i-reconcile nun? We need to show the specific possible outcomes. Pwedeng ang mangyari, head sa first coin, head sa second coin. Pwedeng ang mangyari, head sa first coin, tail sa second coin. Pwedeng ang mangyari, tail sa first coin, head sa second coin. Ayan. Pwedeng ang mangyari, tail sa first coin, tail sa second coin. So, after doing these arrows, kaya siya tinawag na tree diagram. Oo, kasi mukha siyang puno, sabi nila, mukha daw puno. And at the same time, nakikita natin yung connections ng mga outcomes, yung mga laman yung laman or elements ng events using the tree diagram, using the arrows. So, yung arrow magkasabi sa iyo kung ano yung relasyon ng mga elements ng events sa isa't isa. So, what will be the possible outcomes? So, ano yung mga outcomes? So, kung head sa first coin, head sa second coin, ang possible outcome niyan ito. Dalawang head, syempre. Head sa first coin, tail sa second coin, you have head-tail. Or the other way around, pwedeng tail sa first coin, head sa second coin, pwedeng tail-head ang lumabas. Pwede yon. Pwedeng tail sa first coin, tail sa second coin, our outcome for that is tail-tail. So, ito po lahat. Nakita natin yung mga possible outcomes. Now, in answering the example number 3, yung instructions example number 3, again, ang number of possible outcomes, 4. Ayan po, oh. 1, 2, 3, 4. We only have 4 possible outcomes here in tossing 2 coins. Yung sample space natin, kinonvert lang natin ito sa set. So, we have S that is equal to the braces. So, head, 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 tail, tail, head, tail, tail. Nilagay lang natin ito sa set. Kinulong lang natin sa braces. And, sabi dito, we need to find the event that correspond to the phrase two heads are tossed. So, hanapin lang natin dito, anong event dyan ang tumutukoy na dalawang heads ang lumabas. Okay, two heads. So, ito po yun. So, that is set E, ka-enclose sa braces, we have a head, head. So, yan po yung paraan ng paggamit ng tree diagram. That is the way of using the tree diagram in determining the sample space of a given experiment. Okay, so this time we're going to perform example number 3 but using another method, and that is the systematic listing. So example number 3, construct a sample space for the experiment that consists of tossing 2 coins. Find the event that correspond to the phrase two heads are tossed. So systematic listing. This time, we are going to use the systematic listing. Lilista lang natin by logic. Okay, again, in first coin, dalawa lang ang possible outcomes natin. We have the head and the tail. Same with the second coin. So, we have the head and then the tail. Ngayon, alamin natin ngayon yung mga sample space. So, ang sample space niyan by listing logically, so pwedeng head, head. Pwedeng head, tail. Head, tail. Head, head. Head sa first coin, head sa second coin. Pwedeng head sa first coin, tail sa second coin. pwede nga mangyari, tail sa first coin, head sa second coin. Or, pwedeng tail sa first coin, tail sa second coin. So, our sample space for that is ito po. Ayan, naka-inclusive braces kasi sample space is a set of all possible outcomes. So, with that, the number of possible outcomes ay 4. O, bilangin lang natin yung mga events sa loob ng sample space na ito. So, merong 4 na possible outcomes. And the event that will point us to the phrase two heads are tossed, hahanapin lang natin sa mga outcomes na ito, alin diyan ang outcome na tumutukoy sa two heads are tossed. So, dalawang heads ang na-toss, dalawang heads ang lumabas nung tinos natin yung dalawang coin. So, ito po yun. Ito pong event na to. Itong outcome na to. So, set E, that is equal to this braces. Inside of this brace, inside of this set, we have the head. Okay. So, yan po yung example number 3 using the systematic listing. Okay, this time we're going to have the fundamental counting principle. So, the fundamental counting principle is a perfect method in determining the total number of possible outcomes. Kung gusto mo lang malaman kung yung total possible outcomes, you use fundamental counting principle or also known as the FCP. So, ito po ibig sabihin yan. If one thing can occur in M ways, and a second thing can occur in N ways, and a third thing can occur in P ways, and so on, then the sequence of things can occur in M multiplied to N times P times so on and so forth ways. Ibig sabihin, alamin mo kung ilan yung options or outcomes doon sa unang experiment, ganun din sa pangalawa, ganun din sa pangatlo, kung ilan sila, multiply mo lang yun. So that will be the fundamental counting principle. Okay? So para sa intindihan natin, ilapat natin sa example. Okay. In example number 4, Kapihan ni Tierra served the following. You have 2 desserts, cake and pie, 3 beverages, coffee, tea, or juice. Suppose you choose 1 dessert and 1 beverage. How many possible outcomes are there if fundamental counting principle will be used? Okay? Now, so dito, ang tinatalong na sa atin sa example number 4, so, ilan lahat yung possible outcomes niya kung pipili siya ng isang dessert dito at isang juice. Ilan lahat ang possible outcomes. Okay? So, dyan ngayon papasok yung fundamental counting principle. Na malalaman natin later on. Paano ba ginagamit yung fundamental counting principle? Okay, so again, ito po yung example number 4. Sinasabi sa example number 4 kanina na yung Kapihan ni Tierra ay nag-o-offer ng 2 desserts. We have the cake and then the pie. Meron ding 3 beverages. You have the coffee, tea, or juice. So, 3 yon. Ngayon, so kung hindi natin gagamitin muna ang fundamental counting principle, meron tayong 3 option para malaman natin or masagot natin yung sinasabi sa problem number 4. Pwede tayong gumamit ng table method, tree diagram, or systematic listing. Sa kasong ito, para masakita natin yung mga specific na outcomes, makita natin also yung connection nila, I'll be using the tree diagram. So in this case, we have only 2 options for the desserts. We have the cake and then the pie. Sa beverages, meron tayong 3 options, coffee, tea, or juice. Pero dahil nga wala tayong certain level, wala tayong certainty, I should say, na cake ang kanyang dessert, coffee ang kanyang beverage. So, walang ganong certainty, walang ganong level of certainty. So, ipakita natin ano-ano yung mga possible outcomes. Yun lang ang pwede nating mapakita. Yun lang ang definite dito, ano-ano yung mga possible outcomes. So, pwede ang mangyari, cake ang kanyang dessert, coffee ang kanyang beverage. Pwedeng cake ang kanyang dessert, tea ang beverage. Pwedeng cake ang kanyang dessert, juice ang beverage. Or the other way around, pwedeng ito ang mangyari. Pie ang kanyang dessert, coffee ang kanyang beverage. Pwedeng pie ang kanyang dessert, tea ang kanyang beverage. Pwedeng pie ang dessert, pwedeng juice ang kanyang beverage. So, looking on the connections na pinakita ng mga arrows, malalaman na natin o matutukoy na natin yung mga possible outcomes. So we have here, again, cake coffee, cake tea, cake juice, or pie coffee, pie tea, pie juice. So ito lahat yung possible outcomes. So dahil nakita na natin yung mga specific possible outcomes, malalaman na natin ilan lahat yung mga possible outcomes. So by counting all the possible outcomes, kung bibilangin natin yan, meron tayong 6 possible outcomes. Meron tayong 6 na options dun sa kapihan ni Tierra, considering na meron silang 2 desserts na ino-offer and 3 beverages. Pero kung inaalam lang naman natin yung total possible outcomes, hindi practical gamitin ang table method, ang tree diagram, tsaka listing method. Kasi matagal. Napakatagal kasi aalamin mo pa yung mga possible outcomes. After knowing all the possible outcomes, doon ka palang magka-count. Diyan nga yung perfect gamitin ang FCP or Fundamental Counting Principle. So, paano po yun? By FCP, yung una nating experiment is pipili siya ng cake between cake and pie. So, meron kang dalawang options doon. So, second naman, pipili siya dun sa 3 beverages. So, coffee, tea, or juice. So, 3 ang option mo. So, anong gagawin natin dito? By multiplying yung number of options dun sa una at dun sa pangalawa, 3. So, 2 times 3. So, we have 6 possible outcomes. So, kung 3 yan, kung 3 pong particular experiment yan, 3 ang imumultiply mo. Dahil dito, 2 lang naman yung tinutukoy natin, yung pinag-uusapan natin, 2 lang ang minultiply natin. So, 2 times 3. So, 2 times 3, you only have 6 possible outcomes. So, what I'm trying to point out here is kung tinatanong lang naman ang total number of possible outcomes without asking dun sa part na what are the possible outcomes, dun kailangan natin gumamit ng tree diagram, table method, and systematic listing. But if the question is very particular only with the total number of possible outcomes, the fundamental counting principle is a perfect way to determine those, to determine specifically the total number of possible outcomes. So, ganyan po ginagamit ang fundamental counting principle. At dyan nagtatapos ang ating discussion sa Quarter 4, Week 5 ng Mathematics 8. Once again, I am Mr. Jonathan Piroman, a Mathematics 8 teacher from Ilaya Barangka Integrated School. Thank you and God bless.